So we've looked at this picture before. We looked at it the other day, just sort of in these broad terms of imperialism in the outset. But what did we say that this meant the other day?
That they were separating Asia in pieces.
So they're splitting up Asia in pieces. Now, imperialism in China and in the rest of Asia is going to be much different than it was in Africa. Because in Africa, we have European countries in and literally taking over and putting themselves there. Whereas in China, they're going to set up what's called spheres of influence. Now, we talked about that a little bit the other day, and we talked about it a little bit last week. But what is a sphere of influence? Who can remember? All right, so surrounded by it, maybe.
China is like this. Whatever.
Let me. Who? Let's say it this way. Who would be ruling China?
Technically, multiple countries, but in different areas.
Well, that's how it's going to be in Africa. So in Africa, they're going to have European leaders ruling in Africa. In other parts of Africa, it'll be African rulers, but they have to report back. Like I said, like with a substitute and a teacher. In China, it's going to be very different. The reason that they're in China is not to take over China. It's not to take over their land, but to set up a sphere of influence. What this means is an exclusive trading network. So that means England will be able to trade with a certain part of China, and Germany will be able to trade with a certain part of China. So China's still ruling itself. They still have Chinese rulers, still Chinese laws, not influenced by them, but to trade with them. This is the end result, but it takes a lot to get there. Because remember, does China want anything from Europe? No. Just its silver. But we're going to learn about that more today. All right. So, well, yeah, we're going to get all there today. So, China does not want the West. They resist the West. Okay? So, lots of words. You have all these words minus the ones in red. Okay? So, in the 1800s, China had a very, very strong... Remember, China has been the leader of the world for a very, very long time. Sometimes, in history classes, it gets passed over. Because of this reason, because they were so inward, we don't know a lot about Chinese history still. And with their political and government today, they still don't want to tell Americans a lot about what happened in China. Yet the Chinese keep great history. And we do know that they did not want Europeans in. That's one big thing. They did not want the barbaric West in because we were a different set of people than they were. But the main reason, so again, Europe doesn't want to take over China. That's not their point there. But what they do want to set up is trade relations. We want to trade with you. We want your stuff. But like we talked about the other day, China's only going to want one thing in return. But we're going to get there in just a little bit. China, again, very strong nation, very, very humble and strong roots. And for valid reasons, they just want to stick to themselves. And that helps them throughout their history. However, we're going to find out in a few minutes that that's going to hurt China in the long run. And it directly correlates to what's happening in China today. All right. So, as Omar precluded and as we talked about last class, Eliezer even said something. Britain is going to be able to crack, no pun intended, the door in China open by using one thing, opium, right? So this would be a poppy seed matured into an opiate plant, So they are going to open the door to China. They're going to start smuggling, meaning illegally bringing in opium and getting a large percentage of the Chinese population addicted to this drug. Now, opium is what we call heroin today. In its
I
most,
thought opium was supposed to be like one of the key ingredients in heroin.
you're right. So, heroin is an opiate drug, right? Put together differently than how it was used in China. In China, they're going to take raw opium and smoke it. Okay, much like you would a marijuana plant. You take that and you smoke it. That's how they used it. Heroin today is an intravenous drug, meaning you use it. You put a needle into your arm, and that's how they would inject that drug into your system. Now, you can, but most people inject it into their arms using it. Yeah, heroin is a very, very deadly and very dangerous drug. Very, very easily addictive. Because even after one use, you can get your body gets addicted to it, and you go through withdrawal, which is why people using heroin continue to use it, because it is that addictive, and it was that addictive then when you smoked it, and that's one of the reasons that Britain brings it in, is to get them hooked on this drug.
Did Britain know who was against it?
Oh yeah. Nobody would say that, but definitely, because why else do it? But it's just another avenue for them, again, to reach their ultimate goal of trading with China. That's their ultimate goal. So they were dirty in doing it, but they got what they wanted. The Chinese are going to fight back in what's called the Opium Wars. They weren't literally fighting with opium. No, that's not a thing. But they were fighting to get the British out. They said, look, you're doing us dirty by bringing this terrible drug into the country, the U.S. Because you know that you're going to get us hooked. But the Chinese were not nearly as strong. One of the reasons why I said that China being inward and not industrializing, not bringing in things from Europe, like new guns, like, faster production of just about everything, they're going to lose this war because Britain is much stronger than they are. All right. So here is a gentleman and a woman smoking opium. Again, these dens, there was like specific spots where you would go and smoke this drug. And it was just a breeding ground of addicts and terrible crime. And that's exactly what would happen. After the war, China is going to be forced to agree with Britain on some treaties, but they're extremely unfair. Britain is using its power and it's saying, you have to do what we want you to do because we can kick your ass, right? We beat you in the Opium Wars very easily. We are stronger than you, and therefore you have to do what we want you to do. So these treaties become known as the unequal treaties, again, not serving China very nicely. And like I said, the end result is this idea of the spheres of influence. They set up trade networks in China with exclusive rights. Germany can trade with this port only. Britain can trade with this port only. France can trade with this port only, right? So, but it all traces back to this idea of the opium. Now, the story goes much more in detail. We won't get into that. But the fact remains that Europe really comes in, sets up trade networks, doesn't take them over. That's not their intention. Again, they don't want to take them over like they did in Africa. But what they want to do is trade with them. We want your stuff. Chinese are going to try to respond. Remember, Chinese hate anybody from the outside. They want China ruling China. They want to have complete control. Completely understandable. We wouldn't want people from any other country in the world ruling us as much as China didn't want them being ruled by others. Again, the use of the word barbarians is always used. China thought that people from the outside were barbaric. They were not Chinese, therefore they were not as good. They had this idea that they were the best, much like a lot of other countries have. There began to be some problems that happened inside China. Started fighting with themselves because the emperor of the time thought that, you know what? We need to be ruling ourselves only. But there were people who traded with the Europeans, and they made a lot of money. So was it good for them? Yes. So there's people that say, you know what? Europe being here is not a big deal. There's people saying, look, we're getting away from being Chinese. We're letting them rule us. That's not good. We do not want that. Okay. So some movements start happening trying to strengthen China again. Right? They're called self-strengthening movements. They're trying to spread wealth so that nobody would live in poverty in China and therefore would not want to trade with the European powers. This is known as the Taiping Rebellion. Again, all within China, happening with China, not with Europe. It's correlated to what's happening with Europe, but it's not with Europe. However, here comes the emperor. He's going to lay down the law. He says, we want control of China. We don't want those Europeans here. I don't care how much money they're bringing in. But what's going to happen anyway is that Europe is going to continue to control what's happening in China. At least economically. Not politically. Remember, the Qing Emperor is still ruling China.
Is this these slides on the Blackboard?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the Qing Emperor is still ruling there, but politically, but economically, it's really the European powers that are driving all of the economy. All right, moving on. Now there was a movement on your pre-assessment that will be on your test called the Boxer Rebellion. We didn't know anything about it, never learned about it before. Here it is. People got so fed up with being poor that they're going to revolt. Again. It's going to start from the bottom. Yes. I was waiting for that. And the revolts are going to be led by the peasants. Now, what is a peasant again? So lowest social class, right? The peasants are poor, usually farmers. But these peasants were in these secret martial art groups, right? So we get like jiu-jitsu and kung fu and all that kind of stuff. That really starts going on in China. And so the reason so martial arts is like fighting, right? And that's where it gets its name from to Boxer Rebellion, because it is fighting within like a sporting way. Oh yeah. Again, China does not want the Europeans there. And the Chinese people thought that their emperor had done them a disservice by allowing the Europeans to stay. So these peasants are, yes, fighting for money, but they're also fighting to get rid of any foreigners, so anybody who was white, and anybody who was Christian. I always like to talk about another rebellion that happens within this Boxer Rebellion, and it's religiously affiliated. There was a gentleman in China who had been converted to Christianity, forced conversion, of course, from the Europeans, and he had a dream that he was the second son of God. So he said that he was Jesus' brother, saying that he was the Messiah of God, right? And to bring Christianity to Asia. He claimed that he was the Son of God, much like Jesus claimed that he was the Son of God. He was put down quickly and told that he was crazy, and eventually killed in this greater thing called the Boxer Rebellion, because it was really to push the Europeans, the whites, and the Christians out of China. Again, China does not want anybody from the West dealing with their business. Alright, so Boxer Rebellion. Think of Jackie Chan. Okay? Jackie Chan, martial arts, right? Coming from the lower classes, but again, trying to kick the Europeans and the Christians out. All this economic and political and social and religious fighting that's going on is eventually going to end. And we're going to get into China again. We're going to come back to China once we get to World War I and World War II and talk about what's happening. But for the time being, we're going to talk about the end of the imperial rule in China. In 1911, the Qing dynasty, the last dynasty in China, ends. And China realized by this time that they were very, very behind in terms of production, in terms of industrialization, in terms of military, and many more things. The reason that they realize this is because Japan comes in and kicks their ass in war. And we're going to learn about Japan probably next time. But Japan is the same way that China is. They're very, very behind. But very quickly, in about 30 to 50 years, Japan is able to turn around, industrialize, and become extremely strong. And they come in and very easily take over China. So what happens to China is that they're going to be ruled by a prime minister. And that's Sun Yat-sen at first. Okay? There's going to be some more fighting that happens within China over rule, because again, they want dynasties to rule in China. Let's remember, what's a dynasty? What does this word mean here?
It's like a family.
Yes, it's rule by family. So that means when dad dies, who takes over? The son takes over. Except when the Qing emperor falls, this son takes over. That's a joke. That was a good one. That son is not the same son that... Never mind.
Oh, I got it.
Thank you. It wasn't this son, it was that son. Alright. That was pretty good. I just came up with that one too. I didn't even plan that one. Alright, I'm going to stop there.